Much of a party person. I believe you when you say that, Vicky. Now, of course, I don't mean a party lifestyle, but do you like going to parties? You and Vicky Carver, of course. I'm talking about birthdays, banquets, office parties, Super Bowl parties, anniversary parties, weddings, get-togethers, cookouts, game nights, or Dungeons and Dragons for some of you. Do you like going to parties? Now, if you're unsure, there's an easy test we can take. It's simple. Just think about this. When you're invited to a party, what is it that you feel immediately deep down inside? Is it excitement? Friends, fun, food, this is going to be awesome. Or is there panic? Is your first thought, how on earth am I going to get out of this one? So all of my introverted brothers and sisters, I just want to say that I see you today, and I'm looking at some of you. And God loves you too. And it's okay. I'm not sure if Jesus would have considered himself to be much of a party person, but either way, he went to a lot of parties. His first miracle took place at a party, a wedding in Cana. In John chapter 2, you can read about it. The hosts of the wedding run out of wine, and after being prompted by his mother, what does Jesus do? He turns water into wine. And like a boss, he saves the party with a ton of amazing wine. I'm talking about 150 gallons of wine. Not only does he just save the party, but he also spares the host from a terrible embarrassment, which would have been a big deal in that culture. But Jesus mostly went to dinner parties, and he would have been the guest that would have ruffled some feathers. Our text this morning takes place at a dinner party, at an upscale dinner party. It's not just any dinner party, but this is a dinner party at a house of one of the leaders of the Pharisees. And there's a number of Pharisees and lawyers present, probably all the prominent people in town, but they are all there because they want to watch Jesus. And if you read Luke's gospel and everything that's happened before this chapter, you're aware of the growing tension between Jesus and the Pharisees. They have criticized him for the things he's done, usually around Sabbath, like his disciples picking grain or healings that he would do on Sabbath. And Jesus has criticized them. Actually, if you read Luke chapter 11, while Jesus was at a different party at another Pharisee's house, Jesus said, "Woe to you, Pharisees, for you are full of greed and wickedness." Not a polite thing to say when you're at a party, but the tension is growing. And even though they are all there to watch Jesus, what's he going to do? What's he going to say? You notice in verse 7 that Jesus starts to watch them. And he notices how the other guests are choosing the seats of honor. Remember, in ancient Mediterranean culture, this was an honor-shame society, which a lot of people in modern-day West, like the United States, don't understand. We live in a highly individualistic society. We value things like expressive individualism, which is the belief that you can live or express yourself in any way, shape, or form that makes you happy without the judgment of others. As Bon Jovi once sang, "It's my life and I'm going to live it my way." This is a uniquely Western value. People from honor-shame societies, which would include many modern-day Asian countries, have a hard time understanding the American way. Because your identity and sense of worth is radically tied up into what your family thinks of you, what your friends think of you. Are you an honorable person or are you a shameful person? What is your status within the greater sense of society? And if you bring shame on yourself in these honor-shame societies, then you actually reflect that shame back on your family. Now, I'm not saying one society is better than the other. I do think Jesus would have things to say to both societies. And as he's watching how these guests self-select into the seats of honor, Jesus turns it into a teaching moment. He says, when you get invited to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor. And again, as an honor-shame society, the people you hung out with and the parties you got invited to reflected your status and honor within the society. Even more so when you got to a party where you sat at the table and who you sat by. For example, sitting at the right hand of a prominent host means that you were kind of a big deal. But if you're sitting outside at the kids' table at the family cookout, usually next to me, I'm the youngest of four, not a great sign. Now, I do think we actually still do a little bit of this today here in the United States. If you've ever made a seating chart for a wedding, you know what I'm talking about. That some people, where you sit them is going to be a big deal. You never put your mother-in-law outside of the banquet hall. This is behavior that is frowned upon, I've learned. Not personally. Maybe a little bit personally. In my family, we actually experience this every single night at our own dinner table. My daughters will fight over who gets to sit at the seat of honor in my dining room. And you will not be surprised to know that the seat of honor is right next to mommy. Right? Which means that the seat of shame, I don't want to sit by dad. That's where you sit if you're in trouble. It makes me feel great. Jesus says to them, do not presumptuously choose the seat of honor for yourself. Now, on the surface, it almost sounds like Jesus is just giving good party advice. When you get invited to a get-together, here's a tip on how not to embarrass yourself. But this is more than just party etiquette. It's actually very similar to the wisdom literature of the Old Testament. Proverbs 25 says this, do not put yourself forward in the king's presence or stand in the place of the great. For it is better to be told, come up here, than to be put lower in the presence of a noble. The reality is that so much of what Jesus taught is actually a continuation of ancient Jewish wisdom. But there's more to it than that. Jesus isn't just giving party tips, he's reframing a whole approach to life. And as he does it, he's actually revealing to these people the secret to kingdom faith. The central point of what he's trying to say, he says in verse 11, for all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all those who humble themselves will be exalted. That is the main thesis of what Jesus is trying to say. The fact that the Pharisees are deliberately self-selecting into the seats of honor is a symptom of a deeper spiritual sickness, and it's pride. Pride is dangerous. The most dangerous of all the sins, according to some of the great theologians in history, because it does have the power to destroy your life, destroy your relationships, and even cut yourself off from God. When we think about it today, this is a little confusing. Because when you think about the traditional vices and virtues, or if you think about the 7 deadly sins, and I'm not just talking about the movie with Brad Pitt, but if you're thinking about the classical sins like lust, greed, envy, if you think about them in today's society, it is pride. Pride, more than any other sin, has slowly shifted from being a vice to becoming a virtue. Our culture values pride now. We sometimes package it as self-esteem or confidence, but there's a growing value around the merits of pride. Pride. Proud people can be ambitious, driven, and productive. Our culture, our economy values production and ambition. If you don't believe me, just look at our celebrities. Look at our sports stars, our influencers. Look at the people that we elect into political office. You can't look at our elite and powerful people within our culture and tell me that we honestly value humility more than any other virtue, because we clearly do not. Even in the church. There are plenty of large churches that will congregate around a narcissistic pastor. And there are plenty of small churches that do that too. But you'll notice the bulk of Jesus' teaching about pride is directed toward who? The religious types. Pharisees, scribes, lawyers. That's because the religious types, the morally grounded people, are especially susceptible to pride, which means we Christians need to pay extra attention to these issues. C.S. Lewis called pride the complete anti-God state of mind. In his book, Mere Christianity, he writes this: pride is the essential vice, the utmost evil. Unchastity, anger, greed, drunkenness, and all that are mere flea bites in comparison. It was through pride that the devil became the devil. Pride leads to every other vice. There's a number of reasons why pride is dangerous this morning. I just want to point out 3 to you. Pride is dangerous because it hurts our relationships, which often leads to isolation. Pride is dangerous because it erodes our character. And then third, pride is dangerous because it blinds us to our need for grace. First, pride hurts our relationships. I think we all know this. If you've ever worked for someone who's probably a narcissist or been in relationship with someone who's probably a narcissist, you know it's hard to be in relationship with folks like that. Do you remember the show The Office? Of course you do. You should. But there's a character named Angela, who's actually the most religious character in the show. But in one episode, she says this: "I don't back down. My sister and I used to be best friends, and we haven't spoken together in 16 years. Over some disagreement I don't even remember." That's pride. And you might think, oh, well, that's just a TV show. Really? You don't see this? You don't experience this? The pride that keeps you from checking in on that person or picking up the phone and talking to that one person? I remember telling you all the story the night my father-in-law passed away. I called his brothers to let them know what had happened. And when I called one of his brothers, picked up the phone, he thought it was my father-in-law, Jim. He says, "Jim, how you doing?" And I said, "I got bad news for you. Jim just passed away." And he burst into tears and he started crying over the phone because it had been 5 years since either of them had called each other. And now Jim was gone. There was no fight, there was no disagreement, just subtly hurt feelings because the other brother wouldn't pick up the phone and call first. That's pride. Pride gets in the way of our ability to forgive. It gets in the way of our ability to repair a relationship. How many times when, you and your spouse are in a little bit of a spat, if you have a spouse, and you think, oh, it's so easy, I could just go say I'm sorry. But no. It's her turn to say sorry first. Or is it just me who thinks this way? I'm not going to apologize. The other person's in the wrong. They can come and make it right. I'm right here. It's pride. But there's also another kind of pride that just makes it hard to be in relationships with people. A kind of pride that makes it difficult for you to have intimacy with the folks in your life. Are you attentive to the needs and the emotions of the people around you? Can you empathize and show empathy? Can you say sorry? Can you admit it when you're wrong? Are you ever wrong? Or are you self-centered? Does the world revolve around you? And can you ask for help? I knew I'd get you. I think one of the most dangerous aspects of pride is our unwillingness or our inability to ask for help, especially in our culture. You may have thought that I was exaggerating when I said, pride can destroy your life, but it can if you are unwilling to ask for help when you need it. Our culture values independence, strength, confidence, self-mastery, your ability to do it on your own. Which means some of us have a hard time reaching out when we are struggling. Do you know what I'm talking about? Maybe it's with an addiction, a secret sin, depression, anxiety, financial issues, loneliness, spiritual affliction. But when we're not willing to let someone else enter into our brokenness because we're afraid of what they might think of us, they all think I've got it together, right? When we don't let people into our brokenness, that can lead to a whole nother kind of destruction because we're afraid of what they might think. It's pride. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people who end up in a terrible situation, but if at any point leading up to hitting rock bottom, the divorce, the affair, whatever it may be, if at some point, days, months, or years, someone would have just said, hey, I'm not doing okay, I need some help, please. What kind of tragedies could be prevented if we're willing to ask for help? Pride also erodes our character. I think this is self-evident because pride clearly hinders growth and learning. By definition, those who struggle with pride, those who are sick with pride, often think they know best. And they have the answer to all life's problems. This is why Jim Collins, in his famous book, Good to Great, which is an analysis of some of the most successful companies in the world, he says that the number one quality consistent with the best leaders of the best companies is humility. The best companies with the best leaders, those companies have leaders who are humble. And it makes sense because when you're humble, you are teachable. You listen. You're willing to learn. You're willing to admit you make a mistake. You can adapt. You can grow. You can think because you're humble. It's not so with pride. Pride keeps us from growing, and over time, you slowly lose your capacity to grow, and you slowly lose your capacity to show compassion to other human beings. Dr. Harold Shipman was jailed for life in January of 2000 for murdering 15 patients while practicing medicine in England. But police actually believe that he killed somewhere over 200 of his patients, which would make him the worst serial killer in the history of England. He committed suicide in 2004, but never once did Shipman show any remorse for his crimes. But at the point of his death, his lawyer said this: "He was the most arrogant, pride-filled man I ever met. I think he just killed all those people because he thought he was smart enough to do it." if you look at the root causes to most of the problems in our world, racism, sexism, war, conflict, oppression, you'll find pride mixed in with all of it. It is a spiritual sickness that erodes your character. Which leads to the third danger of pride. And this danger is especially important for us religious types to pay attention to. It's that pride blinds us to our need for grace. When Jesus tells the other dinner guests that when they have a party, they should invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, what he's not saying there is that, hey, you can never have a dinner party with your friends or family, or hey, you should never have a cookout or a barbecue with your neighbors. He's not saying that, except on one level, he is trying to challenge us to be more hospitable to those who have been marginalized by society, pushing us to include those who are less fortunate than us, absolutely. But on an even deeper level, he's talking about payment. Inviting people who can't pay you back. To give without expectation of return. He says, do not invite your friends or your rich neighbors because they can pay you back, but give to people who can't pay you back. Now there's a really important reason why he's teaching us this, is because Jesus wants us to learn how to do that for each other, because that's the exact same thing that he has already done for us. God gives us that which we cannot pay back and says, go and do likewise. And notice the very next thing that Jesus says is this parable about a great dinner, which I'm going to go over with you in a moment here. Verses 15 through 24. This is one of the most famous parables that Jesus ever teaches on. He says, someone gave a great dinner and invited many. And when the meal was ready, he sent out his servant to go let the guests know. But one by one, they all began making excuses. One person said, I just bought a piece of land. I have to see to it. Another person said, I just bought some oxen. I got to go try them out. Another person said, I just got married. I can't come. So the servant returned to the master, and he tells him all the excuses that the people gave. And the master gets angry. So he tells his servant, go out into the streets and the alleys and invite the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. And the master said, compel these people to come in so that my house may be full. For I tell you, none of those who were invited shall taste my dinner. It's not just a parable about parties. It's a parable about salvation. You see, in the Bible, banquets are a symbol for salvation and heaven. Isaiah 25 talks about a great feast on a mountain where the Lord of hosts will provide us with rich food and well-aged wine, and on that feast the Lord will swallow up death forever and wipe away every tear, the scriptures tell us. The feast, the banquet, it's an image for salvation. And you're invited not because of who you are, not because of your family, not because of what you've done. You're invited simply out of the graciousness of the host. See, the first round of guests in the parable are invited because they were the right kind of people. They had land, livestock, status. They could repay the master in return. But the second round of people who are invited simply because the master just wanted to fill up his house. I want people at the party. They did nothing to earn the invitation. All they had to do was accept it. And that's the problem with pride. As soon as you feel like you've earned your spot at the table, you commit the sin of self-righteousness and you start to place your faith in yourself and what you've done to be at the table instead of placing your faith where it belongs, in Jesus Christ. The gift of salvation can only be received through faith and humble acceptance, and you can pay none of it back. Now, I know I've told this story before, but it's a good story. I remember the day that I almost drowned at Lake Goodwin. Cookie, that's not funny. That's dark. God bless you. I was at Cookie's house. That's why I think that's why she's laughing. But I was in a kayak with my two older daughters, Nora and Ingrid. I was not wearing a life jacket. They both were. I thought to myself, I'm a strong swimmer, and if we capsize, I'll just use the kayak to kind of climb back on and float. I didn't think it was going to be an issue. And we did capsize. And every time we capsized, I would try to put both girls back on the kayak and then climb back onto it myself, lifting each girl back into the seat. We capsized 7 times. And every time the kayak got more full of water. And there was this moment where I'm like, okay, this is starting to get exhausting. My arms got tired, my legs got tired. I'm wearing full clothes, so I'm weighed down. I start to realize, I don't think I can make it to shore. I tell the girls just to start swimming. And every time I try to touch the kayak, because it's full of water, it sinks a foot under the surface. And there's this moment of like, okay, I'm probably going to die unless I cry out for help, which I really don't want to do because that's embarrassing. It means I made a mistake. It means I was stupid. I was on the lake without a life jacket, for crying out loud, with 2 little kids. But that's my choice. In humility, I can either scream for help or I can die in my pride. I screamed. I cried out. And I was saved by a man in this church, Jim Fletcher. Where are you at, Jim? Right over there. And your son, Tim, pulled me out of the water. And yes, it was incredibly embarrassing, partly because I had torn my shorts from the back all the way over to the front. Total humility and embarrassment. But I'm glad I'm alive. That's for you, Jim. The reality is, that's an image for salvation. We're all drowning. We're all in need of rescue. We all need to cry out and say, yes, me, Lord. I can't pay Jim back for saving my life that day. I mean, I could try, but you don't pay that kind of thing back. You just accept it and you say, hey, I appreciate the fact that you love me and that I'm invited into this relationship with you, oh God. And it's not based off of anything that I've done. And it's in spite of all the bad stuff I have done. Because you are here not based on your merits, where you come from, who your family is, what your status was when you were born. You're here because you have been cloaked in the righteousness and grace of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, who humbled himself and endured the humility and the shame of the cross. We think of the cross sometimes as this torture device, that it was all about pain, but so much of it was about humiliating the person and taking on shame. This is what happens when you go against Rome. You're stripped naked and you're made to look like a fool. That's the beauty of the crucifixion at the same time, because all your shame and every reason you could possibly think about why I shouldn't ask for help, or I'm embarrassed, all of that is taken on the cross of Christ because he endures the humility of it. He takes on your shame and he cloaks you in his righteousness. What a beautiful story that is. What a life-changing story that is for us. So I pray each and every one of us can learn from the example of the very humility of Christ, that we too would humble ourselves in the name of the Lord. Let us pray.